Are you ready? Don't go anywhere. Mr. Hush is about to take you on a spine-chilling journey with his captivating horror stories. Story 1.
The ordeal commenced a few months ago when new residents took occupancy of the adjacent townhouse, transforming my once peaceful existence into a cacophonous nightmare. As a remote worker, the relentless din threatened my sanity daily. Their rambunctious toddlers' shrieks echoed well into the night, rendering sleep an elusive luxury. The canines yap-ed incessantly in the shared courtyard, though I couldn't fault the poor creatures, confined as they were two cramped kennels for the majority of their days. Despite the exasperation my new neighbors stirred within me and their apparent disregard for others' tranquility, I'm not one for confrontation. So I resigned myself to adapting to the auditory onslaught. This onyx siege persisted for several weeks until, one evening, I overheard a heated exchange outside. The gravity in their tones immediately piqued my interest. For context, my neighbors were a young couple with 2 small children. Our interactions had been limited to cursory greetings in passing during the preceding months. The husband owned a white utility van, presumably for his occupation. As I eavesdropped on the argument, I spotted him standing before his vehicle, engaged in a heated discussion with an older gentleman. A few days later, I noticed the absence of the white van that had been a constant fixture in front of their dwelling. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The usual symphony of barking dogs and wailing children had ceased. Secretly, I rejoiced in this newfound serenity, silently expressing gratitude for the peace that had descended upon our block. I exhaled deeply, savoring the quiet. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I assumed they might have embarked on a brief holiday. However, as days stretched into weeks, the familiar clamor failed to resurface. The neighboring townhouse remained eerily silent. I detected no signs of life, no sounds emanating from within. Despite the quiet, all the front windows remained ajar for days, lending an air of peculiarity to the sudden stillness. I began to speculate whether the argument I'd witnessed might have involved their landlord, prompting an abrupt departure. Given my constant presence at home, I kept vigilant, but never observed the return of their van or any moving vehicles. As time wore on, however, I began to perceive strange noises emanating from their residence. Living in a semi-detached house, our dwellings share a common wall, and given the building's age, the partition between our homes is rather thin. One evening, as I lay in my bed attempting to drift off to sleep, an eerie scratching sound emanated from within my closet. This built-in storage space shares a wall with my neighbor's house, its back panel essentially being the dividing wall between our residences. I remained still, listening intently to the unsettling noise, my mind racing with possibilities perhaps it was a rodent that had found its way inside. Reluctantly, I sat up and switched on my bedside lamp. With trepidation, I approached the closet, my heart pounding in my chest. I've never been fond of unexpected critters in my living space. Grabbing my smartphone, I activated its flashlight feature and cautiously illuminated the closet's interior. I meticulously examined every nook and cranny, but found nothing out of the ordinary. A wave of relief washed over me, only to be shattered moments later when the scratching resumed. Startled, I recoiled from the closet door, nearly dropping my phone in shock. My pulse quickened as I frantically swept the light across the closet once more. The sound seemed to reverberate in my ears, growing more intense with each passing second. It appeared to originate from behind the wall, as if something was desperately clawing its way through. I had to stifle a scream, clasping my hand over my mouth. What could possibly be making such a noise? It was far too loud to be a mere mouse. Panic began to set in as I pondered what might be occurring next door. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the noise ceased. I stood motionless for a full 2 minutes, holding my breath, anticipating its return, but silence prevailed. That night, I opted to sleep downstairs, too unnerved by the prospect of hearing that terrifying scratching sound again. Enthusiasm, in the days that followed, I continued to hear peculiar noises from the neighboring house. The sounds seemed to migrate throughout their dwelling, often making it challenging to pinpoint their exact origin. Fortunately, I never experienced that particular scratching noise again, but occasionally I'd hear odd thuds or the sound of objects being moved next door, maintaining an unsettling atmosphere. I began to speculate that perhaps my neighbors were returning sporadically to retrieve their belongings, though I had yet to see them, and their children and pets remained conspicuously quiet. From my bedroom window at the rear of my house, I had a clear view of their garden. Strangely, the dog cages were still present in their yard. This detail became significant one day while I was working. I heard an unusual creaking sound coming from the back of their house. I paused my activities and listened intently. When my windows were open, I could often hear the dogs moving in their cages, causing them to creak. I sat there, straining my ears. The sound was remarkably similar to dogs shuffling around in their enclosures. Hurriedly, I ascended the stairs and peered out of my bedroom window. The cages remained empty. A shiver ran down my spine. This was yet another bizarre occurrence in a long series of strange noises I'd been hearing for weeks. The most unnerving incident occurred just a few days ago, and this time, I actually witnessed something. I had just returned from grocery shopping and was carrying my bags into the house when I noticed my neighbor's front door was slightly ajar. I observed it for a moment, expecting someone to emerge, but the house remained silent, and no one appeared. Dismissing it as another oddity, I resumed bringing in my groceries, deposited the final bag in the kitchen, and returned to secure my front door. Curiosity got the better of me. I ventured back outside, walked down my driveway, and cautiously approached my neighbor's front door. In the brief time it took me to bring my bags inside, their door had opened wider. I could now see into their entryway, and the sight was truly unsettling. The door was half open, revealing their front hallway. Children's shoes and toys were strewn across the floor to the left of the door. A light was on, illuminating what I presumed to be the kitchen at the end of the corridor. "Hello," I called out nervously. As I pushed the door open further, a cold draft swept past me, causing me to recoil in fright. At that instant, the kitchen door swung open, and I caught a glimpse of a dark figure standing there. I hastily retreated, not stopping until I was safely back in my own house, behind my locked door. Only then did I begin to regain my composure. I sat on the floor, trying to catch my breath as a whirlwind of thoughts raced through my mind. You should know that while I enjoy ales, I become genuinely frightened when strange occurrences happen in my own home. As I sat there attempting to calm myself, I heard 3 distinct knocks on the front door. Completely immobilized, a minute passed, then another, but no further knocks came. I cautiously unlocked the door and peered outside, but as expected, there was nothing there. To this day, I remain in the dark about what happened to my neighbors, as does everyone else on our street. They simply vanished without a trace. I haven't seen the dark figure since that day, though I continue to hear strange noises. Sometimes, I find myself hoping that whatever inhabits that house will stay confined within its walls.
Story 2.
This tale began in late August 2019. shortly after I relocated to my current residence in a quaint Florida town. It commenced with minor incidents of items vanishing or being misplaced, accompanied by peculiar sensations and inexplicable noises. Even when I knew I was alone, I never truly felt solitary. I share the house with the roommates and my daughter. One roommate now predominantly resides at his girlfriend's place, likely due to the ongoing strange occurrences we experience here. On our first night, amidst the chaos of unpacking, I set aside my essential bag containing my sketchbook, charger, cosmetics, and other personal items. Distracted by the task of settling in, I found myself engrossed in arranging various belongings. As is my habit, I listened to music while working, rapidly depleting my phone's battery. Naturally, I sought my charger in my bag, but it was mysteriously absent. I scoured my bedroom, then the kitchen and living room, the only others I had frequented to no avail. My roommates are feline companions, and one owns a vociferous chihuahua. Around 10 p.m., I heard a crash emanating from the vacant room down the hall. Initially attributing it to the pets, I was startled when the dog began barking incessantly. Concerned for his well-being and eager to quell the noise, I investigated. Upon entering the room, I was met with a scene of disarray. Several boxes, primarily containing books and action figures, appeared to have been scattered about. To my astonishment, I spotted my charger amidst the chaos in a room I hadn't previously entered. Its presence there defied explanation, as I distinctly recalled placing it in my bag before arrival, and I had observed my roommate bringing in those boxes earlier. He had even retrieved his favorite comic during a break, but my charger was decidedly not present then. The following evening, my keys vanished without a trace, a mystery that remains unsolved even after a year and a half. Additionally, my cats began exhibiting unusual behavior. Philip J., typically prone to anxiety when left alone in my room, would vocalize loudly, puff up, and seek out improbable hiding spots. The cause of this behavior cessation remains unclear. My other feline companion, Jingles, a typically sedate 10-year-old black cat, uncharacteristically began shadowing my movements throughout the house. Approximately 2 months later, in late October, I found myself alone in the living room one evening. My daughter, who had been sleeping soundly since our move, was in bed, and both roommates were at their night jobs. As I quietly watched television and attempted to sketch, I became aware of an odd sound. Initially indistinct, I muted the TV to better discern its nature. A sense of unease washed over me as I recognized what appeared to be a child's voice, talking and laughing. However, something about it felt profoundly wrong and unsettling. I hastened to my daughter's room, finding her still peacefully asleep, undisturbed. The room was eerily silent, reminiscent of a horror film scene, yet nothing seemed amiss. The atmosphere in the house had taken on a menacing quality. It's difficult to articulate, but at times when I'm certain of my solitude, I'm overcome by the sensation that I'm not truly alone. An important detail I neglected to mention earlier when we first moved in: the maintenance man shared a curious observation. He revealed that in his decade-long tenure with the landlord, every tenant of this house had prematurely terminated their lease, some departing after a mere 6 months. He recounted witnessing numerous relationship dissolutions, severe illnesses, mental health crises, and vehicular troubles among the occupants. While it could be dismissed as mere misfortune, I can't help but wonder if there's a connection to the house itself. I continue to reside here, and occasionally, I still encounter inexplicable sounds.
Story 3.
I leased a modest flat nonetheless, then desirable neighborhood for 3.5 years to economize. Upon moving in, my first priority was enhancing security. I replaced the antiquated front door lock with a new one and installed a locking do not to substitute the old, malfunctioning one. all the windows were outdated and subpar. They were the sliding type, constructed of cheap aluminum with inadequate locks. The rear entrance was a patio that opened directly onto a deck. To bolster security, I purchased sturdy wooden pieces, cutting them to fit snugly into the window and door tracks. This measure ensured that any potential intruder would need to shatter a window rather than simply sliding it open. I suspected that a previous occupant might have been involved in illicit activities, given the peculiar visitors and their unusual inquiries about Sam, the former tenant. During the initial 6 months, there were 4 instances of seemingly disoriented individuals arriving at my door, asking for someone named Sam. After an encounter with some unsavory characters, I became vigilant about double-checking all door locks. Nevertheless, I occasionally forgot to secure the front door. One night, my forgetfulness led to a particularly unnerving incident. I was preparing dinner on a gloomy evening when I briefly stepped away to use the bathroom. Upon returning to the kitchen after washing my hands, I was startled to find a middle-aged man clad entirely in black ascending the stairs from the entrance into my kitchen. Alarmed, I questioned, "Who are you?" He claimed to be there to repair a toilet. Feeling threatened but maintaining composure, I engaged him in conversation for a few moments before considering more drastic measures like arming myself with a kitchen knife. The man then elaborated that Gary, the landlord, had dispatched him for toilet repairs. I informed him that Gary wasn't my landlord and that my toilet was functioning properly. He inquired about the address, and upon hearing mine, he profusely apologized for the mix-up. Embarrassed, he carefully descended the stairs, donned his boots, and departed. To this day, I'm uncertain whether he was seeking Sam to settle old debts, mistook me for someone else he intended to harm, or was genuinely a confused repairman sent by Gary who accidentally entered my residence. I used to associate with a somewhat unstable young woman. For privacy reasons, I'll refer to her as Jane. Jane's life had been marred by a dysfunctional family, with her father being the primary source of her troubles. When her father finally exited her life, she confided in me that she attended the funeral solely to ascertain his burial location. A few days later, in the dead of night, Jane called requesting that I accompany her to the cemetery to vandalize his gravestone. While I would never personally engage in such an act, regardless of my feelings towards the deceased, I could empathize with Jane's motivations given her history. Lacking a driver's license, she relied on me for transportation to the cemetery. Upon parking outside, Jane produced a hammer and some grocery bags from her purse. She expressed her intention to enter the cemetery, shatter the gravestone into fragments, bag the pieces, and depart with them. We exited the vehicle and hastily made our way to the grave. Jane's precise knowledge of its location expedited our search, but I felt increasingly uneasy about the entire situation. The cemetery itself exuded an eerie atmosphere. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were trespassing, disturbing the sanctity of the deceased by our nocturnal intrusion. I maintained my composure and allowed Jane some space. Initially, she knelt on the freshly turned earth, muttering curses and weeping from the overwhelming emotions. Suddenly, she erupted into screams and began striking the headstone. Her first scream sent a chill down my spine, startling me. I turned to urge her to quiet down, but it was clear she was beyond reason. She had descended into a frenzy, screaming and hammering the stone with all her might. Each blow of the hammer only chipped away small fragments. It dawned on me that at this rate, we'd be there for an extended period. Her cacophony was so intense that I feared it might attract attention from nearby residents. I also considered how terrifying it would be for any passerby to hear Jane's anguished cries. Self-preservation instincts kicked in, and I began to worry more about my own safety. Jane was completely unhinged, thrashing about in her grief and trauma, consumed by her rage. There I was, alone with her in the darkness, surrounded by the deceased. I worried that if I approached her, She might lose recognition of me, perhaps mistaking me for her father's ghost, and lash out. However, it wasn't long before her intense anger began to wane, fatigue setting in. She paused to assess her progress. 2/3 of the headstone remained intact, but she was already exhausted. That's when she turned to me for the first time. The look of sheer madness in Jane's eyes was chilling. I had always known she was somewhat unstable, but this was an entirely new level. Her movements were erratic and jerky. She rose, thrust the hammer against my chest, and demanded I complete the task. I initially protested, reluctant to become more involved in what I perceived as Jane's personal vendetta. But as soon as I objected, she grabbed me by the ears, yanking my face close to hers. She screamed so loudly it nearly ruptured my eardrums, threatening to use the hammer on me and bury my body alongside her father's if I didn't comply. Realizing I was too deeply entangled to extricate myself, I reluctantly agreed and resolved to finish quickly. Though stronger than Jane, I lacked her reckless abandon. What transpired next confirmed my decision not to resist her. As I smashed the gravestone, knowing I had no alternative, I managed to break off larger pieces while Jane stood behind me, cackling maniacally. She cheered me on like a witch encouraging another at a human sacrifice. I tried to block her out, but it was impossible. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw she had produced a knife, sending shivers down my spine. Before I could react, she knelt behind me, straddling my back, draping her arms over my shoulders and whispering unsettling things into my ears. I ceased swinging the hammer, fearing I might accidentally strike her. She informed me I was nearly finished. Then she did something I'll never forget. Both her hands went of me, one clutching the knife. I knew if I remained there for more than a few minutes, she might attempt to attack me. Survival instinct took over, and I shoved her with all my might before bolting to my car and speeding away. I'm uncertain what transpired after my departure, but upon reaching home, I immediately blocked her on all social media platforms and severed all contact. Her current whereabouts are unknown to me, but I sincerely hope she receives the professional help she desperately needs.